Thank you for inviting me here. My story, of course, is I was a young child, so it won't be the same story that those who are getting much older will have to tell. For example, I know that Mr. Rowicki, I don't know if you saw him, but he was in St. Petersburg yesterday, and he was actually a survivor of the Warsaw Ghetto. And so, because he's in his 90s, I'm only in my 80s. Anyways, I would urge all of you really, I know it's a long ways, but I would urge all of you to go to the Holocaust Museum. It's really a wonderful place. We have docents, you can arrange for docents. And it not only talks about our problems, that is the Holocaust, but also other, and I can't think of the word, genocide. Thank you, Josette, I knew. Other genocides and so forth. Unfortunately, human beings don't seem to learn from experience. Now, my story is a little different. I speak about the people who helped us, basically. You know, at the Holocaust Museum, we say there were several kinds of people during the war. There were the victims, the perpetrators, the bystanders, and the upstanders. And my story is really about the upstanders, which is why I'm here today. Unfortunately, there weren't enough of them, but anyways, let me start with a little background. I was born in France, and my mother was born in Germany. Of course, Hitler came to power in 1933, and in 1934 she left Germany and went to France. That was very brave of her, because she was a young woman in her 20s, and in those days, you know, people didn't leave home like that. And one of the things that she always told us, because she had to do things like being a nanny, there's nothing wrong with that, but she always wanted us to have a regular profession. She said, you never know what's going to happen. You have to go to school. You have to study something so that you can take care of yourself. And that was her thing. And she met my father. She went to Paris. She met my father in 1936. And they got married in 1936. And I was born in 1937. So I have to tell you that when the war started, France was divided into two parts. One was the occupied part, and the other one was the so-called unoccupied part. Well, of course, it was run by a puppet government. You know, the Vichy government was a puppet government. So my parents, and you understand that there was a big depression in those days. It was one in the United States, it was one in Europe. My paternal grandfather had a couple of butcher shops where they lived in Alsace, which is kind of on the edge of Germany and France. And he went bankrupt. And I don't know for what reason, but he moved to a place that was right near Switzerland, Gex, and that's going to be in my story later. It was 3 miles from Switzerland, and we moved down there with him. I was a baby. My parents were also very poor. I didn't have a crib till I was 1 year old, and one of my uncles bought me a crib. That was the story. Anyways, the war started in September of 1939, and my father, being a French citizen, was drafted in the French army. And of course, the French lost after only a few weeks, and maybe a couple of months, and my father was demobilized. And he was demobilized in the so-called unoccupied part of France, and we were in the occupied part of France. Now, I remember very vividly that the German headquarters there were right across the street from us. And I remember the sentries walking back and forth. Well, my mother wanted to rejoin my father, but she couldn't travel. By the way, my mother and my paternal grandparents had to wear the yellow star. I did not, because I was under 6. So my mother wanted to rejoin my father, as I said. But you know, she couldn't travel. It was forbidden for Jews to travel. Well, this is my first upstander. We had a neighbor. He was Christian. I don't know if he was Catholic or Protestant, really doesn't matter. And he said to my mother, he said, "Therese, I'm going to take you. We can walk to where you can catch a train. You can take the star off and catch a train." So they walked all day, and I wish I had asked my mother, "What kind of shoes did you wear?" Because this was before the days of sneakers, and I'm sure it was pretty uncomfortable, but she did say her feet were swollen after that. And she walked all day from 6 in the morning, and while they were walking, they actually came upon a couple of German troops, and my mother was still wearing her star, but she was a fast thinker, my mother, and she had like a suit jacket, and she kind of went like this, and they didn't stop them. So she was very fortunate. And so she got on the train and went to rejoin my father. Well, in the meantime, I stayed with my grandparents. And my grandparents said, "Nothing is going to happen to us." You know, they couldn't figure that somebody would hurt them. They hadn't done anything wrong. I really don't know. Of course, it was isolated, and we didn't have the communications that we have now. If there was a newspaper, it was controlled. And certainly if you had a radio, it was also controlled. So maybe they didn't know at the time. I remember from 1939 to 1942 seeing my father once, and it was across a railroad gate with sentries and so forth. Anyways, they said, "Leave her with us. Leave Jacqueline with us. Nothing's going to happen. And you don't know if there's food where you're going. We have food." Well, my mother had a long, a long memory. And she remembered that during the First World War, her family, which was German, had sent her to live with her grandparents, and she loved her grandparents dearly. And when she had to go back to her parents, she was very, very, very upset because her mother was pretty strict, and yes, we remember, right? Yes. She wasn't like one of these grandmas that you want to hug, okay? So anyways, in the meantime, as I said before, I stayed with my grandparents. Well, my mother remembered this, and she said, "You know, Jacqueline has to come with us. If we're going, we're all going together." So second upstander, Monsieur Fournier, that was the man who had taken my mother through the forest and everything. He took me on the train. He pretended I was his daughter. I was 5. And if I was stopped, I was supposed to say that my name was Josiane Fournier, not Jacqueline Ash. I don't know if I would have done this. I don't know. A 5-year-old doesn't know that much. I don't know how much I could have, how long I could have lied or whatever. But we were fortunate again. And Monsieur Fournier took me on that train, and my mother met him. It was kind of in between the towns. What you have to remember is when an upstander, you know, somebody who helps others, they were doing it they had great danger. I mean, it was great danger for them. Not, you know, we often say, well, why didn't more people do this? Well, I tell you, it's easy to say now, looking from a distance. It wasn't so easy knowing that you could be shot, or you could be put in prison, or your whole family might be, you know, might be compromised for that. So it's not so easy. My grandparents were right in one respect. We didn't have much to eat. Now, I didn't know this. I always had enough to eat. I didn't always like what I had to eat, but my mother told me later, sometimes she had a potato, and she would eat the peel, give me the potato. So, and you know, we did all kinds of things. My father got cabbages once, and we chopped them up, and I had to walk around in them to make sauerkraut, like in a half barrel. And once they got a rabbit, and I thought it was a pet, but you know, it wasn't a pet. I could not eat it. You know, it was really bad. And of course, I knew I mustn't tell anybody that I was Jewish. I knew it was very, very dangerous. I don't think I understood it, really. Now, the other thing is that you weren't supposed to give Jewish people a job. But my father, there was a viscose factory. Viscose was rayon, which used to be very popular. Now you got nylon and Orlon. And we lived in factory housing. And the manager of the factory knew that my father was Jewish, knew that he wasn't supposed to give him a job. But he gave him a job, and my father had a job through the war. Very fortunate. So my grandparents were not so lucky. That the ones that remained in Gex near Switzerland, and the reason I bring up Switzerland is that it was about 3 miles from where my grandparents lived, and Monsieur Fournier, the gentleman who helped us, had said to them that he would take them. You know, he knew the mountains. He was a hunter. He knew the mountains. This is mountainous country. It's the French Alps. In fact, they had the Winter Olympics there in 1968. Well, my grandparents, for whatever reason, did not go, and they were picked up. And they were actually picked up by the French police and not warned. So you see, sometimes you run into people that are really good, and sometimes they're not so good. Anyways, my grandfather wrote this note and said, "This evening we were arrested by the French police, and tomorrow at 7:30 they're going to take us to Dijon," which was another town. "Don't worry yourselves for us. If God wishes it, they will not lock us up." And, you know, love and kisses. And my grandmother wrote, don't worry yourself. Everything will arrange itself for the best. Well, they were arrested February 24th, 1944. They were taken to a transit camp, Drancy, which is kind of northeast of Paris. And 3 weeks later, they were put on a train, and if you go to the museum, you'll see one of these boxcars. And they arrived on March 10th, 1944, and I'm sure they were immediately killed because my grandfather was 70, my grandmother was 66. And of course, if I would have stayed, I would not be here today. And the reason, you know, why they didn't want to go to Switzerland, I don't know. I don't know. And how do we know all this? Well, they kept very good records, the Nazis. We know the convoy they were on. There's a book that was translated and it was in the Holocaust library, and you can see where they were taken, when they left, when they got there. Now, to kind of give you the idea of how much killing there were approximately 1,100 people on that convoy, and only 34 remained alive. It was 10 women and 24 men. That's the only ones that returned out of that 1,100 people. So you can imagine that I'm sure I would have been gone too. After the war, my father and his brothers tried to go back to find out, what had happened, who was responsible. But of course, nobody was responsible. They could never get any satisfaction out of it. And actually, they must have found this ring there. I wear it. It was my grandmother's ring. Because when they went to the old apartment where my grandparents had lived, and actually I lived with them, they saw everything was the same. In other words, there were dishes in the sink. Nothing had been looted. It was just the same way that they left. That's what it looked like. Anyways, they never found satisfaction. In the interim, though, my father tried to get in the resistance, the French resistance, and at first they didn't. I'm sorry, you gotta stop that. At first, they didn't, trust him because he was not from there. So it took him a while to get involved with some of these resistors, but he did. In 1943, finally got, involved with them. And they had quite a few. I didn't mention, I think, that we did live in factory housing. We lived in this kind of all by itself factory. And it was through them that when the Germans really tried to start getting rid of everybody, they must have known that we were there because we always knew when they were coming to get us. So I think that probably they had infiltrated the headquarters, which were in the town, big town next to it. And we always found out, and I remember two instances. Once we slept in the bushes and we got all scratched up, and once somebody gave us a place to stay, and I guess when they came to the apartment and they didn't see us, they left because this was a small place and they didn't have headquarters there. So we were very, very fortunate. Many people, and you'll find that everybody has a different story. Many people were not really as fortunate as we were. So they did some sabotage, these guys, and women. The woman who became my aunt used to keep guns under the mattress. They did, that kind of stuff. And then D-Day happened, June 6, 1944. And the people in the resistance, in fact, my mother gave me a poem, and that's how they knew that they were landing, because the British Broadcasting Corporation had sent them this poem. By the way, you weren't supposed to have shortwave radios either, but we had one, okay. So my father and his friends left, went up further up in the mountains to fight more openly. And that was June 6th, and my sister was born June 12th, 1944, so now you know how old she is. That's why when people ask her about things, she says, I don't know, I was a baby, you know. And she had to be born at home, not because we were so primitive. I had been born in a hospital, but my mother couldn't possibly have gone to a hospital because she would never have come out, and neither would my sister. So her friends helped her, and anyways, my mother didn't know what to name my sister because she just didn't know. And of course, we have a tradition that we name people after people who have died. And so one of my mother's friends said, well, you don't know if Joseph is coming back, so why don't you name her after him? So she was named Josette, not Josephine, Josette. And that's how she got her name. Well, a few weeks later, they thought it was too dangerous for the wives and the families to stay where they were. So we all went up in the mountains. And in fact, it was so mountainous that I still remember that they had sent one of the older men to help us. And he had a cane, and he had the cane against the rung of the baby carriage, and my mother pushed and he pulled and everything. And that's where we were bombed. Actually, I was thinking about this the other day, and I know that we had bombs before, but never that close, because the kids used to listen to the whistling sound. There's like a whistling sound, and we would say, "Il pique, il pique." But we never had that close, and that's where we were bombed. I guess they knew that we were there, or that the resistance people were bombed, and I still remember we were sitting in a house with another family, and we were eating soup, and first the soup bowls went up, and then the table went up and went down. And anyways, we ran out of the house. The house next door was just a big hole. And I was so scared. I remember then when it was time to go, to get back, I could not walk. I could not walk. I had to slide down the hill. It was just very, very scary. Anyways, they landed, the Germans, and they took us apart. By then, I was about 7.5. And they took us apart, and they asked me where my father was. And I said, oh, he's in Grenoble. He works in Grenoble. I don't know, somebody must have told me to say that, but I don't remember. But I remember very clearly that that's what I said. Well, they were losing by this time. They weren't Gestapo or anything. They were young guys, the way they use young guys for cannon fodder. I mean, 19, 20-year-olds, maybe even younger. And I don't know how this was arranged, but a few days later, or a couple of weeks later, we left and went back home on a German truck on top of the duffel bag. My sister in her carriage, myself and me, and they dropped us off. And when they dropped us off, we were waiting for a trolley to take us back home. And we were straight, one of these small planes came and with the machine guns and strafed us. And again, we were so fortunate. I once was talking to a parochial school, and I kept saying, we were so lucky. And one of the teachers said, no, you were blessed. I said, you know what? Maybe you're right that I was blessed. Anyways, in the interim, my mother's family, which was German, she had 3 brothers and a mother and a grandmother, and they got out of Germany in the 30s, the late 30s, 38, or whatever, and they came to Chicago. And in fact, all the 3 boys, I call them boys, they're long dead, but my mother's brothers, they were all drafted in the American Army. And I remember they came to visit us, after the Americans had landed, et cetera, et cetera. They came to visit us, and they brought me a big doll. I'll still remember a big doll, because we really didn't have much in the way of toys or anything. Mostly jump rope, And so it turns out that I guess my mother decided that she wanted to rejoin her family. They didn't take me into their confidence, and I never asked, what made you decide? I always tell the children, if there's anything about your family that you'd like to know, ask now, because once they're gone, and you have to think, well, why would they move here? That makes the most sense. They had moved to Chicago, and so we went to Chicago, and I was 10, so I just had my 72nd anniversary in the United States on April 10th. And I said my own personal Passover, and by the way, a happy belated Passover to all those who keep the holidays. Anyways, they didn't have English as a second language then. So what did they do? They put me in 1st grade. So you know how humiliating it is for a 10-year-old to have to be with the 6-year-old? And kids made a lot of fun, because we didn't move to a place where there were a lot of other, immigrants or French-speaking people. They were not. So it was quite difficult to get acculturated. And, if you look at my 8th grade graduation picture, you can see I look different from anybody else. I have these, my mother made a skirt for me, a taffeta skirt. Nobody else had a taffeta skirt. And everybody had loafers, and I had these Oxfords. It was difficult. It's always difficult, I think, when you come into a new country and you have to get acculturated to it. But in the end, actually, as I said, they put me in 1st grade. I came in April, and by the next September, they put me in 6th grade because I had a wonderful teacher. Her name was Mrs. Sable, and that whole summer, she had me come to her house, and she gave me stuff to read. I liked to read, and so she gave me things, and I'm sure, I can't remember this exactly, but I'm sure she answered my questions. And so by the end of the summer, I knew English well enough that I was put in 6th grade. It was tough though, because sometimes I would say something and I didn't realize why people would laugh at me. Like I said, I'm going to the beach, but it didn't come out beach, okay? I'm not gonna let you guess how it came out. And they would say, oh my God, look at what Jackie said. Look at what Jackie said. And I would sit there, I wouldn't know, what? I didn't say anything. I said, I'm going to the beach. Well, and in those days, you didn't say words like this. Now, now it's nothing, but in those days, you really didn't say words like that. But anyways, I went to school, I got married, I had children. I now have 5 grandchildren. 4 of whom are going to college, actually. They're in college. And just goes to show you, you can, make it. I had a job, too. I had a career, yes. And that's about it. That's my story. I'll be glad to take any questions or comments.
What did you study?
I'm sorry?
Your profession, and what did you study?
Actually, sociology, and probably because I was interested. but I later became a Children's Protective Services person.
Very good.
It was
Yeah, as we start the question and answer time, if we can keep our questions short and to the point, and keep them as questions and not as sermons or your little talk or whatever, or your opinion or your testimony, your story, but a specific question for Jackie. We are filming this, so I will repeat the question so that it's recorded, and you'll be able to then see it and share it with other people at shalomadventure.com. We do have other testimonies on there, including Jerry's.
Oh, do you? Yeah, he's
very powerful testimony too.
Yeah.
And Renee Hammond's and many others. You just have to go to shalomadventure.com and then to search, type in Holocaust, and you'll get the archives of the older recordings of the other people. And on that site, every day there's new articles and new videos and things like that you can check out. Okay, so another question. Okay, right here, and then.
My question for you, Jackie, is during that time, you know, when your father was in the resistance, did you, every day, was it a stressful, scary, or did you have
well, I knew.
When your father was in the resistance,
Yeah.
was it all stress or did you have some time of enjoyment?
Oh, well, I did, but I always knew that it was very dangerous. That I couldn't tell anybody that I was Jewish. I remember one day I was walking and I saw a nun with her charges, you know, catechism class, and she said, why don't we ever see you at catechism? Because France is a very Catholic nation. And why don't we? And I said, oh, I go to catechism in Grenoble. Now, I don't know that she believed me. We didn't have a car or anything, but she left it there. She didn't try to. I knew it was real dangerous. And for many years, if somebody asked me my religion, I would just freeze up. I mean, I would feel the hair stand in the back of my head, you know. I would really be very upset. And I don't think people who live here and have lived here all their lives are quite the same way. I think it really affected me a lot as a child, and then I still have some of the. I'm a very private person. I don't really share a lot with my friends or my family. Actually, my sister's looking at me. Because I don't know, it's just a habit. It's a habit. What happens to you when you're a young child is, you know, you keep it.
Thank you, Jackie.
Okay, there was, is that there?
This experience, how did it affect your children and how you raised your children?
Okay, this experience, how did it affect your children and how you raised
You know what? I don't know if it's affected my children. I've never really asked them.
Okay.
I probably should.
That's okay. Another one there?
They think I'm very anxious. My daughter says you're very anxious. You have a lot of anxiety, and that's probably part of it, you know. But, yep.
Yes.
Do you know what happened to the upstanders that helped you?
Yes,
Do you have
good
any
question.
background
The
on
people
that?
who helped you, what happened to them?
Okay, the Fourniers, I didn't really know because, as I said, I was a child. My parents really didn't discuss. They were busy trying to make a living, and you know. And but when my mother passed away, I found a picture. They went back to France. My parents did, and they must have gotten. I think it was 1977, and they must have taken a picture. That was the first time I ever knew that they had some kind of contact with the Fourniers, because those were the ones who had really helped us. I mean, other people too, but Mr. Fournier really went out of his way.
Is his name listed at Yad Vashem?
I don't believe so.
Well, maybe you can work on that. I know
Well,
Jerry
the
did-
problem is I don't even know his first name or anything, so.
Yad Vashem is the Holocaust Museum in Israel, and there is a garden of trees. It's called the Garden of the Nations, or Righteous of the Nations.
Right.
And a tree is planted for everyone who has helped even just one Jewish person. So Schindler has a tree, and so on, with a plaque and all listed there, and it's quite large. And so yes, he's very thankful for all those who did help and literally risked their lives and gave their lives.
They really did. They really did. And I always say, most people were bystanders, and and some people might have thought this is terrible what's happening, but they didn't. They were afraid, and you can't blame them either. None of us know what we would do if we were put in that position.
Yeah, and the Holocaust Museum that Jackie mentioned earlier on, she's referring to the one in St. Petersburg, Florida. Very nice one downtown. Question there?
Yes, I was just wondering what you thought, based on your experience, what you say what young people could learn the most from what happened to you.
What can young people today learn from your experience, from what happened to you?
Well, first of all, one of the things I really go on is that everybody has feelings, and just because somebody doesn't dress like you or doesn't talk like you, that doesn't mean they're not full human beings. And also, we hope that by teaching the children, because mostly I see children, that hopefully this kind of things won't happen. Of course, the problem is it has happened again and again, and we just want to keep all of us are getting really old. I'm one of the youngsters, and I'm 82, so I will be around that much longer either. And I'm like one of the few witnesses that actually lived under some of those conditions, which I hasten to say are not nearly as terrible as many other people's. I at least never went to a concentration camp. I wasn't really in a ghetto. And actually, and I always put quotes around this, in Eastern Europe, over 90% of the Jews were killed. In France, only, with quotes, 26%. So most of us survived. In fact, I understand that there's a new book out, which I hope to get, where it was just translated. And of course, I've forgotten the name now, that talks about how comes relatively few French Jews were killed. I'd say relatively, only a quarter. I mean, that's a lot of people.
What is that? Why is the reason it was only 26% there?
What?
Why do you think it was only 26% in France?
I think they were more scattered. Like they had that big, what's the word, roundup in the Veldiv for the Paris people, and they rounded up a lot of people, but a lot of us lived in little towns, and so I think that's part of it. There were more places to hide, and I'll tell you, there were some convents that hid Jews and all kinds of things, I have a friend who was in a convent, Marie.
Right, and our cousin Nicole.
Yeah, and our cousin, oh yes, my cousin Nicole was hidden for 4 years. They had a nanny, and the nanny took her, and she said she was some kind of relative, and she lived with her, so I guess there were enough people that helped, so.
And the Jewish population was smaller in France than it was in
Well,
Poland.
it was 300,000, yeah.
So it was a smaller
300, yeah.
Not concentrations like in
Yeah, we
Warsaw.
didn't have major concentrations.
Like Jackie said, the French surrendered after just a few weeks. Do you know the colors of the French flag? White.
Oh, don't say that. That's not nice.
That's not a nice joke. All right, we'll cut that out of the thing. All right, forget you heard that.
Yeah.
That was back in the past, anyway.
But it was
They're
what
better now, right? Okay. Question there.
Okay, so mine is not so much as a question, but a statement. I wanted to thank you for coming, and you just said that you were witness to everything that happened, and now thanks to you, we are all bearing witness. So thank you, because we will not forget.
Well, I would suggest that if you, thank you. I would suggest that if you have an interest, because everybody has a different story, really, that you should look at. You gave us a site. That's what happens when you get older, you lose your words. You gave us a site that...
The ShalomAdventure.com.
Yeah. And if you're interested, because everybody has such varied stories. I mean, you know, a lot of people think, well, you had to be in a concentration camp to be a survivor, you had to be in a ghetto, but that's not true. Anybody who survived was a survivor because they were they were out to kill all of us, so.
Yeah. And of course, it's not just the Jewish people, it was going to be one nation and one people group after another, right? It was a world domination plan.
The Roman, the Sinti, and a lot of non-Jewish Polish people died. A lot of, other people they were not supposed to be as good as, they Untermenschen, yeah, they were subhuman in some way or another. So, that's true.
If they were an Aryan.
Right.
Which is really kind of crazy because it just shows how crazy the whole hatred thing goes. Because Hitler wasn't even among that, right? So he himself didn't fit the description of.
Yeah, actually, Hitler was an Austrian, actually. Yeah. Yeah.
Another question, yes.
Were you still able to practice your religion in QT, or did you have to give that all up?
Actually, I didn't know any. I mean, I knew. My mother said the Shema over me every night, which is, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one." She said that in Hebrew every night, but I really had I knew, all our friends and neighbors were not Jewish, and so I used to go to their house and look at the Christmas tree, but I knew it wasn't for me. I mean,
so that's amazing. So she didn't hide it from you, even as a young girl, that you could have accidentally said something. And
I knew I had a necklace with a Jewish star on it, and when we were up in the mountains, we buried it. And after the war, we went back and we tried to find it. We never did find it. But yeah, I knew I was Jewish, but I really had no training. I mean, I just knew.
But even every night saying the Shema.
Yeah, that's it. She did that every night. Every night she did that, but we didn't have any of the holidays. We didn't have the Jewish holidays, and we didn't have the Christian holidays either. So I learned most of the stuff about Judaism after I came here, really, and started studying it. But other than that, I really didn't know anything.
Another question? Yep.
Yes?
How long after you came to America did that fear still follow you that you were being looked for? Or someone was going
I'm
to
sorry, I can't.
How long after you came to America did the fear lessen of always having to watch over your shoulder that someone might be looking for you?
Well, you see, it was something.
In Chicago, you're constantly looking over your shoulder, right? So, never.
Oh, when we went to move to Chicago, all our neighbors said, "Oh, they have nothing but gangsters there, and they're going to have guns and whatnot." Yeah, so Okay, I forgot the question.
How
Oh, it took a long time. I mean, in other words, it was just a feeling like a very long time. I think I was probably in my 50s or 60s till I finally lost it. But yeah, it took a really, really long time. I think what you learn as a small child, I believe, does affect your entire life. Yeah.
Being that your family was already living in France, what made them decide to come to America when the war ended?
Okay, so since the war ended in France, why did they still decide to come?
Well, they we came in 1947 after the Second World War. Well, because my mother had a lot of relatives here. So, and actually, I know I had a great-grandmother who had 14 children, and I know some of them went to the United States, but we don't know what happened to all of them, you know. So that was a long time.
There was no more fear that it might come up again or something like that? It didn't have to do with that they left? That you know of?
I'm sorry, I don't think I understood.
Here, but it wasn't because of fear that France was still an unsafe place.
Oh no, my father would have loved to stay in France. My father's relatives stayed in France. His two brothers, actually they were colonialists. One of his brothers, the youngest brother, lived in Senegal or Dakar. Well, it's the same thing. Since the 30s, and in fact, my wedding present from him was a carved elephant tusk, which was, well, we all got that, right?
Yes.
So, you know, and they came back to France, and my father's family is really still in France. Pretty much.
Yes.
How long after the war ended did it take before you felt like you could practice your religion openly?
Okay, how long after the war, when you're back in the
Well,
United
I
States,
mean, as
start
soon as
practicing
we
religion?
came here, my parents took me to Sunday school, and you know, and I just started doing the holidays, and then my German grandmother was here, and we did the holidays, so whatever.
Sunday school in Judaism is an educational school. It's done on Sunday, but it's not like a Christian Sunday school, right? So it's a Jewish school for
Well,
kids
you
that's
learn
on
about,
Sunday.
Judaism.
Because
And
it's
they
separate
have
from the
Hebrews.
Shabbat, and it's separate from public school during the week. So it's religious instruction.
Yeah, that's what it is, yes.
Yes.
Why do you think that there are some people who still don't believe that the Holocaust actually happened?
Okay, why do you believe that there's some people who deny the Holocaust?
Well, who knows? I don't know. I couldn't tell you why. I mean, there's plenty of proof. They have this French priest who's been digging up all the mass graves, you know, that were over. And I've been to Auschwitz, and I mean, there it is. It's there, you know. And there's plenty of proof, but I guess some people just don't want to believe it.
Yeah, I don't think that they don't believe it.
They just don't want to.
They want
What?
to deny that it happened.
Yeah. You know.
Yeah, so it's not based on evidence or logic. It's based on hatred, right? It's hatred, so it's basically a disacknowledging of a whole people group. So that's why. Okay, any other questions? Yes?
I had to spend a month in Germany in 2011 for job training, and I have a different background, which I'm not going to go into.
Okay.
But I found that the people there, I don't know quite how to put it. When we, as Americans, tried to talk to people about this,
Yeah.
they didn't want to talk to us. So we had to go on a trip, and the three Americans, myself included, we decided to stop at Dachau. And they wouldn't even tell us where Dachau was. They said, you don't need to know anything about that. It's just a town. It's not important. And I was disappointed.
She's sharing that she was in Germany and she was asking for help with people to find Dachau or concentration camps. And there was seemed to be from people she came in contact with, a resistance and a denial of it, and don't worry about it, you don't even have to go there, it's not that important. Germany has been, if you agree with me or not, just let me know, but for the most part, shown a lot of repentance towards
Yes,
it.
they have. Actually, they have, yes.
Put up some very nice museums and Holocaust museums, and remembrance of it. And politically, they've stood by Israel quite a bit. But things are. But
I
things.
did go.
Was it?
I did go.
Yeah,
And-
you
and
made
I
it to the
saw-
dock, yeah.
I saw the platforms where the people used to get off of the trains, and it was very humbling.
But things are changing in Germany. The statistics of anti-Semitism in Germany is going up, especially among young people. And of course, there's a lot of immigrants coming in who are bringing anti-Semitism with them. So throughout Europe, the numbers are getting worse. And as time passes, there is becoming more and more of a denial of it. And the denial of their responsibility. Poland just recently passed a law that anyone who blamed Poland for any part
That's
in
right.
it would be it was against the law. And you could be in prison, fined. It was signed, it was enacted, it got retracted because of a lot of international pressure. But yeah, they went so far and voted that through. So things are changing in Europe.
I was in Berlin last November. I love that beautiful city. And my daughter and I, we were looking for information because we want to know more about. Even at the hotel, they say, "Oh no, there's plenty things very important that you can see."
Yeah.
And you don't need to see stuff.
So she had a good experience in Germany. They encouraged you. Yeah. So again, it depends who you talk to. But just again, statistically, the numbers are changing back to where they used to be. Unfortunately, France has a lot of anti-Semitic instances taking place currently and for quite some time. And France,
Yeah, that's
a lot
right.
of Jewish people are leaving France and immigrating to Israel as a result of that.
That's true.
We're going to have Jackie and her sister Joanna. Josette. Afterwards, you'll be able to speak with them. We would like to, unless you had anything else you wanted to say.
Not really, but I appreciate everybody's patience.